Usefulness can keep a person in a house for years without ever giving them a place in it. The saddest people are sometimes not the ones left behind, but the ones taught never to lean. At this age, do you still want gratitude, or do you simply want to be counted honestly? I used to think the cruelest families were the loud ones. I no longer believe that. The loud ones leave evidence behind them. A slammed door, a broken plate, a sentence ugly enough that nobody can later mistake it for love. The quieter families are harder to survive. They do their damage with good manners. They lower their voices. They straighten the placemats. They pass the butter. Years later, someone sits across from me and starts speaking as though the pain began on one particular evening. It almost never does. And most family damage begins earlier, when a frightened person finds a respectable way to repeat their fear until everyone else starts calling it wisdom. The woman who came to see me that afternoon was named Marianne Holloway. Marianne was not my friend, not in the easy way people use that word. We did not exchange Christmas cards. We had never spent long afternoons in each other's kitchens. We were not women who cried into telephones together. What sat between us was older, thinner, and in some ways more binding than friendship. Years ago, there had been a winter in Marianne's life when the numbers on her kitchen table had turned vicious. Her first husband was gone by then, though gone is one of those merciful words women invent to keep from saying weaker, uglier things. He had left behind unpaid obligations, missing signatures, a child, and the kind of silence that forces a woman to sit very still in her own house, because if she moves too quickly, she may panic. At the time, I helped her bridge a financial gap she was too proud to name plainly. She paid every cent back. What remained between us was not debt, it was recognition. I had once seen her in a season of private humiliation and had not mistaken it for weakness. She had once learned that I could help without using the help to enter a woman's life more deeply than she had invited. Women our age do not forget who has witnessed them when they were least arranged. When Marianne sat down in my sitting room that afternoon, I knew almost at once she was not there for legal advice. Women of our age do not grip a handbag that tightly when they want practical guidance, and they do it when they need one obedient object in the room because the rest of their life is no longer willing to stay neatly folded. She was 64, still elegant in the disciplined way some women remain elegant, long after delight has gone out of the habit. Pearl earrings, hair set, lipstick steady. Her knees, I noticed, were troubling her more than she wanted me to notice. Each time she shifted in the chair, she did it in 2 small stages, not one, as though her body had become something she negotiated with privately. I did not think I was being cruel, she said. Not, I made a mistake. Not, I hurt him. Not even, I was wrong. Just that first careful sentence of a woman old enough to know that shame does not always arrive crying. Sometimes it sits down, crosses its ankles, asks for water, and then leaves the glass untouched. I thought, she said, I was teaching my daughter how not to be foolish. Her husband's name was Thomas Reed. Her daughter's name was Elise. If you want to understand what happened to them, you have to begin before Thomas. That is the trouble with older people when they finally tell the truth. We know too well that nothing begins where younger people think it does. Marianne's first husband had not merely failed her. He had trained her trained her to believe that any peace a man offered came with a trapdoor under it. By the time Thomas entered her life, she had built one rule and laid it across everything like plastic over furniture. Never let Elise lean too hard on a man who can leave. Thomas did not enter their lives like a rescuer. That was part of his sorrow. Men who arrive noisily are easier to distrust. You can point to the performance and protect yourself. Thomas came in the quiet way some steady men do. He fixed what was loose without narrating his virtue while doing it. He learned the house without announcing he had done so. He knew which cabinet door had to be lifted slightly before it would close, which tea Marianne could take with her medication, which hallway bulb blew first when the weather changed, which grocery bags Elise hated carrying because the handles cut into her fingers. He did not ask to be admired. Families are often most careless with the people who save them work, not because they are unloved, because usefulness is one of the quickest ways to become invisible while still being needed every day. Marianne loved him. I believe that, but she loved him in a frightened language. That matters. A woman can sleep beside a decent man for years and still keep one locked drawer inside herself labeled temporary. And Marianne did something worse than mistrust Thomas privately. She translated that mistrust into her daughter's emotional education, not crudely. Crude mothers are easier to resist. She did it in the careful phrases women are often praised for. Keep one account in your own name. Appreciate help, yes. Depend on it, no. Do not get so comfortable that you forget what people can do when they change. Blood is blood. A girl raised inside that weather does not hear fear. She hears experience. She hears intelligence. She hears womanhood sharpened by pain. And so Elise grew into the kind of young woman who did not think of herself as cold. She thought of herself as sensible, boundaried, mature. She was warm right up to the point where warmth might have required surrender. That is a very modern kind of tragedy. To mistake distance for self-respect so thoroughly that by the time love arrives in a plain, durable form, it feels less attractive than caution. Thomas was never treated badly in any loud, obvious way. That is what made the whole thing so difficult to name. He was thanked. He was included. He was welcomed. He was depended on. And still, over the years, the house taught him that his place came with an asterisk. Older people know that wound intimately. It is not always the wound of being thrown out. It is the slower wound of being allowed to stay on conditional terms for so long that your body begins learning the condition before your mind will admit it. Thomas stayed. That was where Marianne's whole private system began to rot. If he had left after 2 years, she could have called herself wise. If he had disappointed them plainly, she could have set her caution on a shelf and named it foresight. But he did not leave. He stayed through the humiliating middle of life. Through migraines and tax seasons and leaking pipes and Elisa's graduate school panic. And the winter Marianne slipped on the back step and hurt her hip badly enough that sitting and standing became a private negotiation she hated anyone seeing. He stayed through the long, undramatic work of becoming reliable. And the longer he stayed, and the less Marianne's fear looked like wisdom, and the more it began to look like a habit that had outlived its excuse. The first time I knew something had gone wrong, Marianne told me, wasn't because of an argument. It was because of how Thomas had begun to move. He stopped sitting down like he lived there. That line stayed with me, because by my age I trust posture more than explanation. A person who belongs lowers into a chair. A person who has learned not to inconvenience others descends into it carefully, like a man borrowing furniture. Marianne told me Thomas had developed a small habit. Before sitting at the dining table, he would pause half a second too long, as though checking whether he had guessed his position correctly. Sometimes he would ask lightly, "Anyone using this chair?" In a house where he had paid bills, installed locks, driven her mother to appointments, and painted the downstairs bathroom on his own weekends. That sort of humiliation rarely enters the official story. It enters the body anyway. A hand that no longer lands flat on the table. A shoulder that folds itself in before anyone asks. A joke about not wanting to be in the way. A man carrying his own plate to the sink before everyone has finished eating, because it feels safer to be useful than rooted. The evening everything finally exposed itself was not a graduation, not a holiday, not anything dramatic enough to flatter itself as a turning point. That made it worse. Marianne had decided, after months of pretending she was recovering better than she was, that she would sell the old house and move into a senior living community in the spring. There is a humiliation age brings that younger people rarely understand in time, not the move itself. The way other people begin discussing your life in folders, dates, valuations, and practical arrangements before your heart is finished living in the rooms. There was dinner that night. Nobody called it a meeting, because families think they can soften reality by changing the noun. But there were attorney packets on the sideboard, repair estimates, a legal pad, a list of dates. The handwriting on it was Elise's, neat, fast, competent, and already a little impatient with sentiment. Thomas had straightened the dining chairs before sitting down. Marianne remembered that because Thomas always noticed furniture before people did. The key had changed after work into a clean button-down, but he had forgotten to take off his reading glasses, and Marianne almost told him so from the kitchen, then didn't. Later, that small withheld kindness would hurt her more than some larger things. That is how guilt ripens in old age. It fastens itself not only to catastrophe, but to details too minor to deserve the amount of pain they later carry. The blue porcelain dish by the front hall held spare keys, receipts, and the little pieces of daily life people drop without thinking. Thomas's house key was there that evening because he had come in carrying boxes from the garage and tossed it into the dish with the rest. Marianne told me she kept looking at that dish during dinner for reasons she could not yet explain. No one shouted. No one cried. No one said anything a stranger would hear and call monstrous. Elise looked down at the attorney packet and said, in that brisk, tidy voice of competent adult daughters, that it would probably be easier if the meeting with the attorney the next morning stayed immediate family only. Then, after the smallest pause, she added that Thomas needn't come. Needn't. As though exclusion, if phrased politely enough, could still pass for efficiency. As though a man could live in a house for 11 years and still be gently excused from the room where his place in it would have had to be named honestly. Thomas reached for his water then and missed the glass the first time. Not by much. Enough. At our age, and in a room like that, such things are louder than shouting. Elise did not look up when she said it, and that was part of what made it cruel. She said it while aligning the corner of the packet with the edge of the placemat, as though this too were simply a matter of order. Thomas smiled after that. Not woundedly, not theatrically, but in the administrative way older people sometimes convert pain into manners before it spills on anyone else's shoes. Of course, he said, if that's simpler. Simpler. That was the second ugly word of the evening. No one corrected Elise. That was the wound. Not only what was said, but what was permitted to remain said. Marianne adjusted the top page of the attorney packet instead of lifting her head. She told me later that this was the moment she understood the full size of what she had done. Not because her daughter had suddenly become cruel, because the sentence sounded natural. It had weather in it, practice, history. It belonged to a language Elise had been given long before she had words for what she was learning. I realized, Marianne said, that my daughter wasn't speaking from one evening. She was speaking from me. That was the real confession. Not that Elise had been rude, not that Thomas had been hurt, but that Marianne had spent years making fear sound like good sense, until her own daughter no longer knew how to recognize devotion without suspicion attached to it. Thomas did not make a scene. That would have been easier on everyone else. Instead, he nodded once and stood up. He walked to the front hall and stopped near the blue dish. Marianne said he looked at the spare key the way a man looks at a thing he has already understood. He should not have to surrender, and yet somehow already has. He set it down, not hard, not in a way that asked to be noticed, just quietly, like a man finally tired of pretending not to understand the rules of the house. When he bent to tie one of his shoes a few moments later, he put a hand on the entry bench to steady himself. He was not yet old enough to need that bench. Humiliation changes the body quickly. It steals balance first. That detail made Marianne cry in front of me, not beautifully. The tears came in the offended way older women sometimes cry when they realize they have lived beside a lie too long to keep calling it prudence. She told me Thomas went upstairs after that, still wearing the same shirt. He sat on the edge of the bed without taking off his shoes, loosened his collar but not all the way, removed his glasses, and held them in one hand too long. I could see his shoulders from the doorway, she said. They looked narrower, not smaller in truth, smaller in permission. That line stayed with me too, because that is one of the oldest sorrows people carry into later life. Not merely that they are unloved, but that they have cooperated in their own diminishment because it seemed for years like the kinder thing to do. Thomas was not blameless in the clean moral sense people like, not because he was cruel, because he had mistaken endurance for eventual translation. He had believed that if he stayed long enough, fixed enough, softened himself enough, made himself useful enough, the house would one day know what to call him without being forced. Houses do not correct themselves, not without cost. Marianne sat at the kitchen table after he went upstairs, while the paperwork stayed spread beside her like evidence from the wrong trial. She said she could barely hear the rest of the conversation. All she could hear were her own old sentences returning to her in a voice she no longer wanted associated with intelligence. Be careful. Do not lean too hard. Keep something separate. Do not let a man become the ground under your life. Then she looked at me and said the sentence that made the whole thing worth telling. I thought I was teaching my daughter how not to be broken, she said. I did not see I was teaching her how to make a good man live like a temporary arrangement. There are women who only arrive at that sentence late in life, if ever. I did not comfort her. Women our age do not always need comfort. Sometimes we need accurate naming more than mercy. So I told her the truth. I told her families are not always ruined by betrayal. Some are ruined by caution, by a frightened woman praised too long for her good sense, by a daughter who learns how to be warm without ever truly surrendering, by a good man who mistakes usefulness for place, by years of order, competence, responsibility, and decency that somehow still leave one person asking in his own house whether anyone is using that chair. Marianne looked at me for a long time after that. Then she said, very quietly, he was never asking us to admire him. He only wanted not to be arranged. Yes, that was exactly it. That is what many older people want from the people around them and are too proud to request plainly. Do not arrange me. Do not reduce me to logistics. Do not thank me warmly while placing me one chair outside the truth. Do not use my steadiness and call that closeness. Do not wait until my body has already learned how to make itself smaller before telling me with tears and great sincerity that of course I always belonged. By then, the body already knows what the room believed. The spare key sat in the blue dish while she spoke. I could not stop seeing it. Not because it meant Thomas no longer loved her, just because it meant he had finally understood the difference between being needed in a house and being counted in its real number. That is how some families go cold, not because nobody loved, because fear was given a seat so early and for so long that by the time love finally asked to be recognized properly, the house had already learned to call it complicated.